So we are continuing our Roman series. Not too far to go till we finished. Actually, we've passed well past the midway point, and today is session 7, all about mystery. Is the title. I don't know if you've ever tried to explain something to someone, and they just don't understand what you're talking about. They're just not getting it, no matter how hard you try. And it's really frustrating, isn't it? You're just trying to explain it and they just do not understand. It's like you're talking to a plank of wood or something. So I remember when I was a bit younger and I had a friend, I was trying to explain to my friend the offside rule, okay? And I tried everything. I drew a picture, still didn't get it. I got a chessboard out, I started moving the pieces around. I even tried to demonstrate it myself, got a ball, got my friend, still nothing. Eventually, I just gave up. It's quite funny, actually, because the offside rule today isn't as straightforward, is it? For those of us who know, it's got more complicated. In our next chunk of Romans, from chapters 9 through to 11, a lot there, isn't there? Paul is trying to explain something. And it's a bit more significant, a bit more complicated, maybe, than the offside rule. And he's grappling with some really hard questions about the chosen people of God, the elect, about the role of Israel in the light of Jesus, and then a little minor issue about God's sovereignty and our role. And Paul is trying to explain this. He's trying to explain the mystery of salvation. And to do this, he's trying to explain it in lots of different ways until, hopefully, the listeners finally get it. Today, we're not going to read Romans 9, 10, and 11. That's a lot of reading. We're just going to stick to 15 verses. So we're in Romans 10, and we're going to read the first 15 verses in Romans 10. So give me a little second to turn there if you've got a paper Bible. So it says this: brothers and sisters, my heart's desire and prayer to God for them, that his fellow Israelites, that is that they may be saved. For I can testify that they have a zeal for God, but it isn't based on knowledge, not knowing the righteousness of God and seeking to establish their own righteousness. They have not submitted to God's righteousness. They've not submitted to basically the new thing that God's currently doing. Verse 4, for Christ is the culmination of the law, so that there may be righteousness for everyone who believes. In the beginning of this passage, we see, try to emphasize it, we see a very emotional and passionate Paul, don't we? He says, in the deepest parts of himself, his very heart's desire, his constant prayer is that his fellow Israelites would enter into salvation in Jesus. And in chapter 9, the previous chapter, Paul actually gives us even stronger language, sharing with us kind of some of his intrusive thoughts. He says, I have great sorrow, right? I've just underlined some of these things. Unceasing anguish in my heart. Paul says he would even take Israel's place, right, and be cut off himself. And when he says this, he's actually echoing Moses in Exodus. If you remember, where Moses pleads with God to forgive the sins of the people for building that golden calf, even if it means being blotted out of God's book himself. That's what Moses says. And so Paul here is a bit speechless. The Israelites, think about it, they've got everything, haven't they? They've got the scriptures, they've got the promises, they've got the law, they've got the covenant. They've even got Jesus, who is a Jew. Yeah, they've got everything. And so while the early church was mostly Jewish, if you didn't know that, it's true, they were mostly Jewish, eventually becoming Gentile, of course. So while the early church was mostly Jewish, Paul's frustration in these chapters 9, 10, and 11 is this: why then have the majority of Israel rejected the very Messiah that they were waiting for? Quite frustrating, isn't it? This final thing, and you've stumbled on it. They, like Paul, are zealous Jews. Elsewhere in different letters, Paul says, I am a man of zeal, right? I'm a Pharisee. I'm really hardworking. I'm devout. And his fellow Jews are the same. But they're missing the point of the whole story, what it was always pointing towards: Jesus. They lack this knowledge of Jesus. And Jesus, Paul says, is the culmination of the law. It's all pointing to him. Depending on your translation, it might not say culmination. It might say fulfillment of the law, or it might say end of the law. I think culmination is one of the better options. The reason end of the law is a bit of a problem is it gives the impression that the law was horrible, horrible thing. Finally, Jesus has come to be the end of it. And that's not true, is it? Because who gave the law? God, right? So God gives good things, doesn't he? So it's good. And also, end of the law, Jesus being the end of the law, is a bit of a problem because in chapter 8, Paul says Christians are still under the law of the Spirit. Yeah? So the law wasn't bad. And you might be thinking of that famous verse in Matthew 5. Jesus says, I've not come to do away with the law, but to fulfill it, right? And I find it interesting that Jesus says that. It almost gives the impression that some people were saying, is this guy trying to do away with the law? Because the things he's saying and teaching, is he getting rid of it? And Jesus is like defending himself here, saying, well, no, actually, I've not come to do away with the law. I've come to fulfill it. In other words, I've come to reveal the heart of it. I've come to uncover it. I've come to show the deeper meaning behind it and its function. And I think this is what Paul means here. Jesus is the culmination of the law. Jesus shows us the true nature of the law, what it was originally intended to do. And so in Jesus, and when we model him, there's going to be this righteousness like never before, since we now live, finally, the true purpose, the true nature of the law through the Spirit. So I do want to prepare you, because I think the following verses are actually probably some of the most difficult to understand in Romans. So in the next 8 verses, we are going to read Romans, but Paul actually quotes the Old Testament 6 times. So he quotes Deuteronomy, Leviticus, Isaiah, Joel, and we don't have loads of time to look at all these in detail. We could do that for a long time. But please remember, when someone quotes the Old Testament in the New Testament, they're not just doing it to prove a point, like they're having an argument with someone. Well, this verse says this. They're actually, oftentimes, they're drawing on a key idea in both of the texts, or they're referring to a whole chapter, but they're just going to quote the verse. Do you know, like if someone starts singing a song, right? The first word, sometimes the first note, the first 1 second, you know what the whole song is. Yeah. So sometimes when someone quotes, even says a word, it's often there's a bigger story behind that chapter, that verse that they've quoted. So, you ready? Moses writes concerning the righteousness that comes from the law, that the person who does these things, that's the law, Old Testament law, will live by them. But the righteousness that comes from faith says, do not say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven, that is, to bring Christ down, or who will descend into the abyss, that is, to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we proclaim. And so in this passage, Paul's pulling out lots of scriptures, but there's one key theme, the heart. Paul quotes Moses from Deuteronomy 30. And Deuteronomy 30, if you're familiar, is a part of Moses' final speech. The people of God are just about to enter into the promised land, and Moses kind of has this lovely speech. He offers loads of advice, a couple of warnings. And one of the incredible things that Moses says in this speech is God's word and law are not out of reach. They're actually in your hearts. 8 times Moses says this, talks about the heart. Isn't that interesting? It was always God's intention, wasn't it, for us to have this internal heart obedience. And Paul's fellow Jews that he mourned earlier were just unaware that the story all along had a different kind of shape as it was initially understood. It always pointed to Jesus. It was always about him, just not reading it right. And going back to Romans, Paul says salvation through Christ is now here. It's accessible. And it's not about striving to reach God anymore, but it's about responding to what God has already done. And so that verse that we read, you don't have to bring Christ down from heaven. Okay, he's already done that. He's already come. Yeah, you don't have to raise Jesus up from the dead. He's already been risen from the dead. And so in Jesus dying and rising from the dead, God has brought his word near to you. The word is near to you. Salvation is here. It's in your mouth and it's in your heart. And then we read this. Because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For one believes with the heart, leading to righteousness, and one confesses with the mouth, leading to salvation. A very familiar verse for most of us, right? At the same time, probably one of the most misinterpreted verses. Here is what Paul is not saying. Paul is not saying faith is basically this personal, individual thing that you verbally express, right? A confession. That's what it is. Just saying Jesus is Lord and God raised him from the dead by itself isn't going to do much for you. Think about it. Not everyone actually has the capacity to vocalize this, right? So having faith isn't like saying this magic formula. And faith is not trying really hard to believe that Jesus is Lord and God raised him from the dead. If I just convince myself that this miracle actually happened, if I gather all the evidence, if I really believe it really, 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 really hard, then I'll be saved. Faith is not about what you can do, say, or think, because faith doesn't come from you. Faith is a gift given to you by God. And we read this elsewhere, Ephesians 2, 1 Corinthians 12, Paul says, faith is a gift. If we make faith about us or our ability to believe, we rob God of his incredible gospel and the work of Jesus. It is God's awesome plan in Jesus that enables faith in you to be possible, okay? The gift of faith. So I don't know if you remember this. If you're under the age of 15, this was before you. But in August 2010, after a mining incident, 33 miners were trapped 700 meters underground in a mine in the country of Chile, South America, and they had no way out, okay? They were completely dependent on a rescue mission, really, and they were trapped, not for 5 days, not for 10 days, but imagine this, they were trapped for almost 70 days underground. And they lived off contaminated water. They had emergency food supplies, but it only lasted 3 days. So they had to ration it out very stingily. Imagine. And the world watched on this amazing operation, this rescue mission. And they eventually, figured a way to get down, send this capsule down, designed to kind of rescue the miners one by one. Thankfully, everyone survived. And it turns out, actually, that many of the miners were deeply religious. They built a small makeshift shrine in the underground chamber, and they organized daily prayer meetings twice a day. And upon rescue, this is what one of the miners said. We were not 33 trapped miners, we were 34 because God was with us. What a great story that is, okay? But I want to ask you this. Do you think all 33 miners believed unequivocally, with unswerving faith, sure faith, 24/7, the entire time that they were underground, that God would rescue them? What do you think? I'm guessing some were more hopeful than others, and I'm guessing that the majority had days of disbelief. I'm guessing some didn't even believe. I'm guessing this. But did God only save those who had faith? No, he saved each and every one of them, despite their level of faith. You see, it isn't the intensity of our faith that saves us, but the object of our faith, Jesus, right? It isn't how intense your faith is, it's how intense God is, his love for you and his gospel. That's what saves you. And the little faith we do have, and the little faith they had because they knew about the gospel, right? And through that, it's like it's been gifted to them, and they have this faith. And it's because of God's awesome salvation plan in Jesus that enables this faith that's possible in us. So yes, you must believe and confess, of course, but you don't self-generate this faith. It comes out of what God has already done in Jesus through the Spirit. What does Paul say? For one believes with the heart, leading to righteousness, and one confesses with the mouth, leading to salvation. So your heart and your mouth, they go hand in hand, don't they? It's not just your mouth, like a theological truth that you express, but actually, what you confess with your mouth is proof that the Spirit has done something in your heart. And so you confess, right? And that's what Paul says, Romans 5:5. God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that he's given to us. I think I do love this verse that we're looking at, because I wonder sometimes if we have overcomplicated the gospel, right? I wonder if we forget ourselves, just going about a regular day, and we sometimes our minds, maybe we've overcomplicated it. It's not too complicated, is it? I love how simple Paul makes it. Just two things. Jesus is Lord. God raised him from the dead. That's pretty simple, isn't it? It's amazing. It's amazingly simple. I don't know if you've come across a recent Bible translation called the AOV, the Authorized Overcomplicated Version. Here's its translation. Because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and that pineapple has no place on pizza, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, but only if you read from the King James Version, you will be saved. Now, I do need to just clarify, I'm joking. Oftentimes, I do this without saying I'm joking. 2 years later, so I couldn't find that Bible translation. I looked everywhere. So just to be very clear with you, this is one of my jokes that I wrote down. So let's not overcomplicate it, right? Let's not forget how simple it is. It's so simple. But this doesn't mean that we should just settle for the simpleness of it, right? We should think deeply about it, shouldn't we? And if we've read Romans so far, there's loads to say about it, in fact. Yes, God raised Jesus from the dead, but this has consequences. It radically changes everything. And Paul spends lots of time, as do others, in breaking this down and kind of squeezing all the goodness out of it. Let's keep it simple, but let's not make it simpler. I really like this quote from Albert Einstein. Everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. Okay? Our faith is simple. Yes, it is. But there's so much goodness and unsearchable depths to that simpleness. Let's not over make it simple. It is simple. But let's take that challenge of digging deeper into this wonderful truth. It does come with risks, doesn't it? This confession that we're talking about. Proclaiming Jesus as Lord may not put you in the same kind of immediate danger as it did for those early Christians who lived under the rule of Lord Caesar, right? However, in our own time and context, declaring Jesus as Lord, in the way we live, of course it has challenges. And we might not fear for our lives, at least here, right? But we do sometimes feel discriminated against, maybe, yeah, marginalized, misunderstood. Maybe we're labeled as intolerant or outdated. People probably laugh at us. There's different things, isn't there? The stakes are different, but the cost of confessing Jesus as Lord remains. And sometimes it can put us at odds with the world around us. I like how Paul does not say, if you believe in your heart, you'll be saved. I like how he also says you must confess it as well. You must always be speaking it too. And I was thinking about it a little bit, and I was thinking about Acts 2, and they were praying, having that prayer meeting, that heart to heart, right, connection with God. And then when the Spirit came, it caused them to start confessing, to vocalizing it. Um, and I just thought, heart and mouth, it's right there, isn't it? And it's brilliant that we have to do both. It's something inside us. Yes, it is. But then we're not meant to be quiet about it. We are meant to confess it. We are meant to vocalize it in different ways. And then the reason for this is, as Paul says, the scripture says, no one who believes in him will be put to shame, for there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. The same Lord is Lord of all and is generous to all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. But how are they to call on one in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in one of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone to proclaim? And how are they to proclaim him unless they are sent? As it was written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. I love that. I mean, I love it all, but whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. A brilliant verse. The gospel is for everyone. With all that we've read, Paul does finish with a bit of a challenge. This incredible news, this incredible good news must be shared. Now, Paul is not saying here that when you share the gospel, please only receive it if you have, please only preach it if you have washed your feet and made them beautiful, right? How beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. I don't think that's what he's saying. I'm sure you all have beautiful feet. This verse is from Isaiah 52. And Isaiah 52 is this long poem, and most of the early Christians thought it was a prophecy about Jesus and the gospel he would proclaim. And the point is, with the beautiful feet bit, the point is that the good news, the gospel, is so good, so welcomed, so needed, that those who receive it are like, thank you, even your feet are beautiful, right? And I don't know if you remember where you were on Friday, the 28th of May at 2021 at 2 p.m. I do. I was about to defend my doctoral thesis through my Viva. Lots of years of research, a real labor of love. And for those who know anything about sort of the Viva process, it's something at the end that you come to and you just dread it, right? It's like a nightmare scenario. And at the end of this years of research, you basically get 2 hours of grueling questions, and you have to defend what you've written. And at the end of it, you find out how your examiners have decided to grade you. And what you don't want is a fail. No one wants to fail, do they? All this years of hard work. And also, you don't want major revisions, because that means I have to do more work. And so you're hoping for good news. And when they delivered the good news, I cannot tell you how happy I was. I was so happy and overwhelmed. I just wanted to give him a hug. I wanted to kiss everyone in the room. I was so happy. You see, this good news is so good. And the person that brings this news is so beautiful. Even their feet, as horrible as feet can be, and I know a lot of us don't like feet, they are so beautiful. How beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. And that's how Isaiah had prophesied that people would feel about us, as the heralds, right? As they ran to bring the good news of God's salvation to Israel. That's how he pictured people would feel. So happy, so joyful, so welcome. And Paul's seen it first time. He's traveled all around on his missionary journeys, telling people the gospel, seeing the joy on their faces. The gospel is such good news. When Jesus came and died, was raised from the dead, something incredible happened whereby the world had changed and it would never be the same again. One commentator calls Jesus' resurrection a silent earthquake. In other words, something's happened, which many may not know just yet, but it's shaken the earth to its core, and it's changed everything as we know it. And we've read about this in Romans so far, that God created this world. He created us to flourish, to represent him, and to worship him. It all went wrong, didn't it? Sin, the power of sin came into the world, and we're all affected. But Jesus defeats it, right? Sin and death lose in Jesus. They lose their power. And we become new creations, filled with the Spirit, made right so that we can put the world right again. How beautiful are the feet of those who bring this good news? How beautiful are your feet? We live in interesting times, according to The Times. The first article on the left was published a couple of months ago. And the journalist claims in this article basically that Gen Z is significantly less likely to identify as atheists compared to their parents in Generation X and their baby boomer grandparents. 25% of Gen X today identify as atheists, and this number drops to 20% among millennials and to just 13% among the under 25s. That's great news, isn't it? That's good. That's good starting ground. Gen Z is more likely to describe themselves as spiritual, with 62% of 18 to 24-year-olds saying they have a spiritual side, compared to only 35% of those over 65. And that's incredible. This challenges, doesn't it? It challenges the assumption that we often have in our heads that people are less and less and less and less likely to be open to spirituality. Christianity massively challenges that. These stats don't conform to sort of like church attendance, but they do tell us that a younger generation are more likely to be wanting to chat about faith. The other article on the right, actually, as I was kind of preparing for this message 2 days ago, this came out on Friday. This article discusses, on the back of that article on the left, that Bible sales in Britain are basically going up and being driven by this Gen Z's increased fascination in spirituality. So this is incredible. According to figures from publishers, right, Christian publishers, Bible sales grew from 2019 to 2024 by 87%, right? With non-fiction book sales declining at the same time. And also religious book sales in general just rose, not just the Bible, but general religious literature, reaching 25.2 million sales in last year. And some people are looking at why has this happened? And some people are putting it a lot down to COVID. I mean, as terrible as COVID was for so many people, it did force lots of us to just stop and think, hold on a minute, life is really fragile. And people reflected on what really meant to them. Is there more to life than this? And also, mental health has continued to get worse since COVID. And this is another factor in that young people are trying to find something to give them hope and inspire them. There's loads of incredible stories out there. There's a book by a guy called Justin Briley. It's called what's it called? Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, something like that, along those lines. But he's basically, I follow him on X, on what was Twitter, and almost every day he's posting these incredible stories. Here's one more, just again, this is the co-founder of Wikipedia, Larry Sanger, right? For a long time, very vocal about his skepticism to faith, okay? Just a few weeks ago, he says, I'm a Christian now. And the bit I love, okay? The co-founder of Wikipedia, an online digital encyclopedia, found faith when someone gave him a paper Bible. That's the best bit, isn't it? The sense of humor there is wonderful. And I do want to encourage us, these aren't one-off stories. They're really not. There's regular things happening here. There's a movement. People are more open to talking about these things. The gospel is such incredible news. You know, when Jesus came, died, rose again, this silent earthquake shook the foundations of the world, and sin and death lost the power. And in Jesus, we are new creations, aren't we? Filled with the Spirit. And here's the beautiful part. We get to share this message. How beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. And Paul challenges us here. How can people call on Jesus if they've never heard of him? And how will they hear unless someone proclaims him? And we are called to be those messengers. We're called to be sent to share this gospel. And people are looking for something today, right? It's not as hard as it used to be. I remember when I was at school and new atheism was on the rise, and it was like, you didn't want to talk about your faith. And it was very hostile. But now, it's different. Younger people aren't, new atheism's like dead, whereas Richard Dawkins and all these people. Richard Dawkins recently called himself a cultural Christian, right? There's an incredible interview online. This person who wrote The God Delusion, Bashed Faith, says, actually, I don't mind Christianity in a sense. It's better than all the rest, is kind of what he says. So I want to leave you with this challenge. Where will your beautiful feet take you this week? Where will you be? Where will you go? What places will you tread? Maybe now, as I'm talking, you're thinking, where will I be tomorrow? Where will I be on Wednesday? Maybe there's people in your heart, people you've been thinking about. Maybe this is an opportunity now for you to take those beautiful feet of yours and to talk to them. Say what you did on Sunday morning. Say you was learning about this gospel message. It was really great and inspirational. And so I want to encourage you, be confident. The tide is turning. God is doing something. His Spirit's working in places that we didn't think was possible. Yeah. Right. God bless and have a wonderful week.